And you can't even drive? I can. Are you stupid, eh? Are you a stupid fool? Well, why can't you drive then? You can't even drive. A bit grey today, isn't it?
Well, hello everyone. Here we are, lolloping into your Monday afternoon. It's time once again for the Deepest Lore. Welcome. Hold on.
26 years old and you can't even drive.
Oh, look, we're live, but the thing didn't play.
Oh.
You need to replace the that clip at the end with those two. It's so good. It's just perfect.
It is really remarkable. Well, welcome back, Pharaoh. The triumphant Pharaoh returns. How you doing? How have you enjoyed Deepest Lore since you've been gone?
Very much so. I really enjoyed the Wasteland stream. It was actually so unbelievably good that I applauded it. I stood up and everyone clapped at the end of it. So yeah, thank you very much, Mr. D.
You were like Orson Welles in that famous screenshot of Citizen Kane.
Rosebud, yeah.
We know a remote farm in Lincolnshire where Mrs. Buckley lives. Every July, peas grow there. You really mean that?
And here's Deepest Lore's very own Rosebud D. How you doing, D?
I'm doing very well, and so is my Rosebud. And I'm very honoured to have been asked to appear on the triumphant Pharaoh return stream. So I shall.
Pharaoh, did you see the stats that I put out of Deepest Lore? Well, since you've been
I did notice those, yeah.
Let me just go through some of them. Hold on a minute. There's this one. Deepest Lore appearances to date. Who's that? Who's that is in the number one slot? Almost 30 appearances. Pharaoh. What do you think about that?
It's true. Well, I'm honoured and proud to be involved in such an industrious and creative enterprise. But the stats aren't everything. So,
and then in the solo, there's been about 22 solo streams, and then coming in at 20 appearances. This must be his 21st. Is D. So what about that? And then with over 10 is Panama Hat. So really. Those, I mean, me, Pharaoh, D, and Hat are kind of the Deepest Lore crew, and then there's a host of people who've just come in for one or two, you know.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
Those Steam characters.
Yeah. I mean, Time Stealer's got a feel. I mean, maybe Time Stealer will be back on at one point, but
No.
I did notice though that looking through because I did a breakdown of the themes. And I did notice that if the three of us are the main characters on Deepest Lore, that we are each pulling the show in a slightly different direction. So, how can I say? D obviously pulls it towards the arts and the highbrow. You, Pharaoh, have got, I mean, look, adverts and propaganda is about a quarter of the shows. And they're all Pharaoh shows. So you somehow, like, I don't know, push it more towards the dark arts, I suppose. And then, you know, stuff like pop music, children's television, you know, I push it more toward comics. I push it more towards the lowbrow. So
this is just the mercurial mind of AA. What is in your head that week? You just pluck it out of the ether and bring it to life.
I see. Yes, I'm going to move my mic back. Everybody's saying I'm too loud. You just do that. Okay. Now, before we get going today, we're going to be talking about arts and crafts today, and Pharaoh has prepared a bit of a lecture for us on that. But speaking of lectures, would you like to make the announcement that we talked about, Pharaoh?
Yes, I'm pleased to announce the official launch of my new course on the academic agency, Foundations of Entrepreneurship 1. So I've been working away for the last year on this brand new course. Now, the whole aim of it is to help people launch a business for the first time. So a lot of people may be asking, we're about to hit a big moment of inflation, some challenging markets, but actually I think it's going to get increasingly important this year to hustle. Maybe you're going to, be out of business. Now's the time to pick up the skills you need to succeed in business. So it's like I've actually done a terrible low effort advert AA. I've put it in the private chat. I don't know if you want to quickly load that out.
Oh, right. Okay. Let's have a little bit of a watch. And if you send it to me, I'll put it up as a separate video as well.
Okay, great.
Some people don't watch this show. Oh, here we go. Let's have a bit of a watch of it. I do warn you, by the way, that there's a chance there'll be stuttery images here due to
10 reasons to buy Foundations of Entrepreneurship in 60 seconds. Number 1, value. 9 hours of content for $99.99. You're practically paying me minimum wage. Number 2, knowledge. 10 years of experience working with global brands distilled into a single course. Number 3, mistakes. You'll save more than the price of the course with the mistakes you won't make. Number 4, marketing. Learn the marketing tricks to make your business a rising star. Number 5, clickbait. You won't believe how these 18 secret lessons will transform your business. Number 6, influencer. Carlisle loves Foundations of Entrepreneurship. Number 7, social proof. Everybody loves Foundations of Entrepreneurship. Number 8, good cause. All the money from the course will be reinvested back into the community. Number 9, propaganda. You will buy Foundations of Entrepreneurship. Number 10, the money back guarantee. Complete the course, and if you're still not happy, you'll get a full refund. Buy Foundations of Entrepreneurship today.
So there we go. I'm not sure about that refund part. No, I'm only joking. I'm only joking. I've never
Goldberg variations and everything.
I might do it myself to pick up some tricks. I noticed, by the way, that you did the whole $9.99 business and not £100.
Yeah, it definitely does work as a little trick to get people through the door. It's just a psychological barrier around pricing. So the other thing is,
I deliberately did the opposite, Pharaoh. When I priced my courses, I gave them round numbers.
Yeah,
£150, £350, because if somebody went, "Oh, that's a bit expensive," that was the correct thing for them to think. So I'm actually going the other way with my pricing.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
I mean, yours is a kind of a premium offering. Mine's focused on great value at the same time. So that's why you can push those messages. So, and there's lots of interesting stuff covered off there. Even if you've already started a business, there's some great sections on marketing, some little tips and tricks you can learn, and also on funding and how to get cash into the business as well. So. I think it's really worthwhile and useful for virtually everyone.
And we should mention that you are an entrepreneur, Pharaoh, right?
Yes, I've run a business myself for over 8 years, and have worked in the online space for around about 14. So all of that knowledge distilled into this unique course.
Many dark arts as well. I had a little bit of a flick through, and I noticed that there's quite a bit of dark arts knowledge, shall we say. So it could actually pair with Foundations of Rhetoric quite well.
Yes, exactly. And I think you should definitely listen to the rhetoric course as well. You need to buy both at the same time to really succeed, in my opinion.
Oh, a dark arts pack. Yes, you could.
Dark arts, yeah.
And use the Palpatine clip. Use my knowledge, I beg you.
Well, I've been having a go at making little ads recently. So I put my obviously there's this one, of course, for the.
There's a lot of great information and history in this book, and
There's that one.
Yeah, classic.
But also people have been sending me pictures of their copies of the Populist Delusion, and I put together a little ad for it. Not a particularly effortful one, but I had great fun finding really shitty live versions of the of
I
the
noticed that.
Unpopular Opinions theme tune. You want to have a listen? Just give it a whirl.
Why don't you sit right back and...
That is a bit.
Why don't you sit right down and stay a while? We like the same things and I like your style.
It's a bit scattered. Awfully scattered.
Now you see, Farah, that may seem like quite a low effort ad, but there were principles in there that I'm hoping you might recognise. There was the social proof,
Yes.
right? The social proof, the fact that other people are out there buying it. There was the element of the secret club. There's an in joke in there, which is the theme tune of UO, which I forget what they call it on that Persuasion Matrix now, but there's a like, oh, I want to be part of this exclusive thing. Is it the scarcity principle they call it?
Yeah.
So there was that. Yeah, that's about it.
It's UGC, user generated content.
Oh yes, indeed, yes. So there we go. Now, shall we get on to talk about? Oh, there was one more thing I wanted to share just before we get going. It was this.
Isn't it off now? Hey, grown-ups. Here. Hey, grown-ups.
Oh, too cute. That's adorable.
So cute.
So
Hello,
there we
grown-up.
go.
Hello, grown-ups.
Now, arts and crafts. Where do we start with this? Let me get up your PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, I guess the idea came from, there was a couple of people commenting in chat before about arts and crafts and maybe getting Dee to do a stream about it, and I took it upon myself to thrust it upon the deepest lore. But I think it's a really interesting subject matter. What I've got here is a couple of slides just talking through about where arts and crafts came from. There's some interesting comments on industry, maybe the carrot pill can get a bit of a revival as part of this, and then also modernity and a bit of critique on where we're at right now. But should we just get started on it, or?
Yes, I'm going to mute myself and just tell me when you want to flick on the slide.
Sure. And I just wanted to kind of quickly initially set the scene on this with, if you scroll down to the next section, with this little bit here, and imagine it's the turn of the century. We're going from the 18th to the 19th, and there's a group of romantic poets that are starting to realise a change that's going on in England, and I'm sure we all know these words. And maybe we should get Dee to do the reading for this with his excellent poetry voice.
Oh, sorry. I was settling back and listening. Oh, and did those feet in ancient time walk? And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills? And was Jerusalem builded here among these dark satanic mills?
Now what Blake realised at this time was that the face of England was transforming, and he included this often confusing line. I mean, I used to sing it all the time. It's in chapel and school every morning, among these dark satanic mills, and I think many people considered it to be like a positive thing at the time, but actually it was, Blake considered it to be a huge negative. He hated these kind of large industrial mills popping up into the land, and this is the kind of the first real critique of industrialization in England that I could particularly find. So this is the kind of the beginnings of the arts and crafts movement. People realizing that the physical landscape's changing, what's going on in terms of production's changing, and actually maybe it's not for the better. So I think Blake's quite an interesting character. Should we move on? I just wanted. Did you have anything to say about Blake at all?
Well, Blake is a favorite of mine, and I have studied him for a very long time. I would also say, of course, that he was deeply involved in the sort of literally the manufacturing of his own work. I mean, he was not only a poet and a mystic, but of course, he was also an artist, he was a draftsman, and he was a printmaker, and he made and published his own works. They were painstakingly etched or engraved and printed by him and his wife, and then they would also, after they had printed the books, they would hand color them. So with watercolors. So his work was quite literally a kind of homemade, home manufactured handicraft. So yeah, I would certainly advise people seek out facsimile images of his books.
Yeah, I went to a Blake exhibition once of his images of Satan and things like that. Absolutely phenomenal work. Really is. I mean, I rate him as both an artist and a poet.
Yeah, definitely.
There's not that many people who are good at both, I don't think. No, maybe Bob Dylan. I'm joking, D. I'm joking. The other thing is that occasionally he'd do the both side by side, where you had like the image and the poem, which Maxwell House has been aping recently with his tarot stuff.
Yeah.
But did anybody do that before Blake, or did he kind of invent that idea of you're going to get both? It's going to be like an experience together type thing.
No, there was certainly there were precedents for that. Although, I mean, that would the idea of a single artist doing all of that work was very unusual, I would say. I mean, keep in mind also it was very difficult because the way that he produced those books, he didn't use movable type. He actually etched the text, which of course you have to do backward. You have to do all the writing backward on the plate so that it will print forward when you actually go to print the plate. So that's quite a skill, and he had his own very idiosyncratic sort of handwriting as well. So yeah, I would say that whilst all the sort of ideas of combining image and text and things like that were had all been done before, they weren't done by the same person. They weren't all done by the artist. So this what's the word, Gesamtkunstwerk, the total artwork, that is something that I think was fairly unique to Blake at the time.
Because I think that maybe the closest analogy would be your medieval manuscript, where you've got like a biblical passage and then a beautiful picture, but those were different. Like the font writers and the artists were often different monks.
Yes, the scribes would write the text, and the illuminators would illuminate the the meaning of the text with painting. So.
Does that mean that Blake had a very small readership then, or limited by his just his friends, basically?
Yeah, I think he could only sell 100 books. They're like they're almost like a limited edition artwork or something. They're very highly prized.
Oh, they are, and I've had I own a small Blake etching, and I've had the remarkable chance to look through quite a number of copies of the books, and they're all unique, of course, because they're, they weren't printed. They're printed using a process that is quite variable. They're not, which is etching, and so it's all going to matter how you ink the plate, and so every one of them is different. Of course, they were all hand colored, or many of the copies were hand colored. So, every one of them is really a unique work of art, even though it's reproduced. But yes, he sold very few copies. He had a few patrons, and you could actually go to his house. I mean, he sort of had a shop, and you could go to his house and buy them. But he was also a very peculiar man, and I do think that he scared off a lot of potential clientele.
He claimed he could see demons and demonic forces, and he was a massive nudist and would often be nude in his garden with his wife.
Yes.
Oh my gosh! All right.
He was quite a character.
Okay, so yeah, so I think Blake's a hugely important figure as this kind of unique kind of artisan fighting against industrialization. And what I've done here is just to kind of show you just one example of how the industry was just sort of destroying traditional craft. And this is wallpaper production. So wallpaper hugely important to the kind of Victorian home. This is one of the machines. Now each one of these kind of like mini rolls on the right hand side is a different color, and you build up your picture by basically rolling an imprint of one color on top of another one. And I've got a couple of examples below. But the problem with this move to industrialization was there was very little quality control. Can you just scroll down a second, AA? Yeah. So you would offer, so basically the sort of two ends of the spectrum. Often you'd have these kind of overly complicated, in my opinion, not fit for purpose wallpapers. So this was a genuine wallpaper. It's literally like some kind of classical temple done in 3D, and you can see they've got like a number of different colors to build up that 3D landscape across here. But often, design wasn't thought about during this process. They just cared about producing something they could sell. I mean, have you ever seen something like this before, Dee?
Yes, I have. So I don't know if you've got this, if you're going to talk about this, but there was a tradition, before the kind of advent of printed wallpapers, of buying prints. So there was a very popular market for selling prints. You could sell. So you would do, if you were an artist, you would do a painting, and then you would have someone do an engraving of your painting, and then they would print, multiple copies and sell them, and they were cheap. It was a way for people to have art. It's very cheap to have art. But there was a tradition of using these prints to decorate walls, and I don't mean like hanging up a particularly nice one. I mean like using a whole bunch of them to kind of paper over the wall. You would kind of use them as proto wallpaper, and then there's a few surviving examples of in England of walls that have this papering of print. So I would suspect it kind of came out of that. And of course there was also a real tradition of wall painting, wall decoration, and starting in this, I would say the 17th century, we would import Chinese painted papers, but they would tend to be like you have here, these big contiguous scenes. And when they sort of, I think the early wallpaper producers tried to sort of ape these styles. They would try to ape, like, this reminds me a bit of kind of, the grotesque, sort of Raphael period paintings in the, in the Vatican and such, and the Vatican apartments. And I think some with limited success, as you say.
Yeah, and so the some of those Chinese papers are amazing as well, because they would just cover an entire wall, like you said, with a continuous image. But this was kind of like always about trying to create something that the middle class could ape and make it look like you're an elite. The other problem was that there were no designers in the way that we would see things. You'd have manufacturers; they would hire people to do a design, but they would never really have them on staff, if that makes sense. Like we live in a very design orientated age where you know the names of designers, they have a lot of clout. But back in the day, you would buy from a manufacturer; they would have the kind of strength. But the problem was you would end up with things like the one below. If you scroll down AA again, if you don't mind. And you end up with these, I think, frankly, horrible wallpapers and horrible designs. So this is meant to be a pattern. You've got like a whole load of random scenes. Sorry to say this, Americans, but I think this is one of yours. You've got kind of like some frontiersmen on the top left. You know, a wife and a cart. Like, why would you want this on your wall? Basically,
I love it.
it's like it is so kitsch. It's kind of cool, but at the same
Well,
time,
it's also kind of aping, I think, French toile. You know, there is a sort of style precedent for this sort of thing. I love these. I mean, I have a great fondness for this sort of thing, but I certainly see what you're doing.
Yeah, I imagine when they're done better than this, I think that they'd be more appealing. But again, I think you got to think about the kind of power of pattern, and it's all a bit of a higgledy-piggledy mess. None of the all of the vegetation around those little scenes feels very unnatural to me. And so it does have a kind of, like I said, a bit of a kitsch charm, but I think there are basically these fundamental design problems because it's so the markets, not just for wallpaper but across the board, this is just one example, became so manufacturer led. And so, you know, coming into the kind of mid 1800s, people were starting to kind of question this and say, look, the markets have been taken over by these big manufacturers. We need to do something about it. Now, I've got three kind of big kind of theorists who came in to try and counter this viewpoint. And if you scroll down, we've got our first chap, and of course it is Augustus Pugin. And I've described him as an architect, obviously famous for assisting Barry with the Houses of Parliament. But he's also a designer as well, and he's really well known for doing a lot of the interior design for the Houses of Parliament as well. So designing furniture, designing wallpapers, fabrics, etc. But he was also a thinker and wrote several important books challenging and questioning, should we have this industrialist-led marketplace? And also, I call him the original Tradcath. One thing we forget about is the so-called Oxford movement and this huge resurgence of Catholicism in the UK. They were finally allowed to be in elected position again. Like Catholic freedom has massively increased, and so Pugin actually was a high Anglican and then converted across to be Catholic, and wrote a number of treatises on on the kind of Catholic stuff. Now I've got a little. Sorry, do you want to come in with thoughts on Pugin?
Based Catholic. I mean, I you know, quite like Pugin's work. So yeah.
I've managed to pull out a little quote at AA. If you just scroll down a second, and again, this is. I don't think there is one thinker that really drew all of arts and crafts together. But again, I think Pugin's just another stepping stone on the way for it. And this is something from his contrast book, where he contrasts modern architecture to the architecture of the Gothic period. And he's unsurprisingly a big advocate for the Gothic style, the Gothic revival. And he says, yes, such efforts of these can only be produced. He's talking about the old Catholic churches on the minds by buildings, the composition of which has emanated from men who were thoroughly imbued with devotion for and faith in the religion for those for whose worship they were erected. Their whole energies were directed towards attaining excellence. They were actuated by far nobler motives than the hopes of pecuniary reward or even the applause of admiration of mankind. And I think it's a really interesting challenge to the industrial, utility-focused mindset of liberal the liberal Victorian period, where money was king. And he's saying, actually, you need to focus on beauty, on faith, on transcendence in your artistic work itself, and that's why he's marked out in my mind as a key person. So, Yeah, AA.
Yep.
Any thoughts so far at all?
Well, only that I've been working on this Carlyle thing, and he sounds an awful lot like Carlyle in this regard. You know, the universal cash nexus, as Carlyle called it, literally stripped. I mean, he's talking about what we would call today atomized individualism, right? You know, reducing everything to this cash payment, and that really the much more important things in life are, you know, philosophy, poetry, you know, the kind of things that allow you to be heroic and transcendent. Yeah. I actually discovered, because I've been writing this article on Carlyle, that Carlyle actually coined the term industrialism in the essay "Sign of the Times." I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
But he, I didn't know that he was the first person to put a label on it. And in that essay, he says that they lived. So he wrote that in 1829. So right around the same time that Pugin was around. He said, "We live in an age of machinery in every outward and inward sense of that word." So he thought that the kind of this mechanical age was reducing everything, including poetry, including everything, basically to a kind of a question of quantity and utility. So and then he says what he wanted, and you can see this is like a romanticism in all of these thinkers, right? He yearned for the primary unmodified forces and energies of man, the mysterious springs of love and fear and wonder and enthusiasm, poetry, religion, all which have a truly vital and infinite character. So I think that there is like a capital R romanticism behind all of this, and also hidden German idealism, I would call it. Like there are people like Schiller and Goethe and so on who were starting to get popular in England at this time, and there's some of this thinking in them as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure that Pugin read Carlyle as well. His books weren't that popular, but they were popular. This is Pugin talking about here in some of the designer circles. So again, Carlyle's obviously talking to the whole nation, and so I think one strand of his thoughts kind of penetrating through to artistic spheres finally. Now I've got a couple of examples of his work for critique by D. I mean, he's already said he likes the ones that I put in as the bad example here. So this be interested to get his viewpoints on some of Pugin's works. But all of these were designed for either the Houses of Commons or the Houses of Lords. And these are a couple of wallpaper examples. And I just wanted to say, look how compared to the fussiness, the kind of complicated designs, that you know, all these kind of optical effects, etc. These are graphic works, highly impactful, that you could see from far away. So Pugin's attempting to really kind of change the landscape. Any thoughts on these, Mr. D?
You know, obviously, yes, the kind of focus on a repeating design, and the kind of cognizance of how that repeat, you know, the scale of repeat and all of that, and it's, you know, as you mentioned, the historical allusions that are rife in Pugin's work and other work from this period. I mean, yes, it's a distinct change. And you know, again, we see echoes of things that were popular in the past. So in very in great houses and in the homes of the aristocracy, in the, you know, I would say the 16th century, especially the 17th century, 18th century, it was popular to use Italian velvet or silk damask fabric as a wall covering. And I think that there's, you know, again, the kind of repeat that you get on fabrics. You know, many of these velvets were kind of quite heavily patterned. They were what was called voided velvet or cut velvet, and they would have had a similar kind of focus on a repeating pattern like this. And I would say that we start to see echoes of this trend, this upscale, sort of very high end design trend, sort of filtering down and finding a new kind of niche through the ability to to produce these on a mass scale. So
and that kind of medieval aristocratic element was something that Pugin tried to work into all of his work. He was very much focused on the kind of that he put the high into high Anglicanism before his conversion to Catholicism, if that makes sense. It's all about the kind of the glorious medieval past. But also there's other stuff that's interesting. If you scroll down a second, sorry, he was in some ways like a designer of symbolism. And so one of the kind of symbols that you'd see in some of his work is the portcullis. Now, if you've ever been lucky enough to go around the Houses of Parliament, you may have entered via Portcullis House, which is a new building just next to the Houses of Parliament. And you'll see this logo everywhere. So interestingly, Pugin created this. I think he took it from Westminster Abbey, the kind of the iron gate with the crown on top, as a symbol, and then he wove it through the rest of the work. You can see on the right hand side here is a chair that he created specifically for the Commons. This kind of lovely leather chair, and again he gilded the top bit of leather with the same portcullis. So he's trying to create a design identity, or we would call it a brand today. And it's just interesting in just how strong a brand it's literally lasted today, where it's on this portcullis is on the letterheads of different government departments, isn't it, today? So okay, should we keep on going through? I think I've got just going to show you. He did some furniture as well, and obviously this is in the kind of the Gothic style, which is his kind of preferred style, which he said it relates to people focusing on the past. Are you a fan of? Are either of you two a fan of Gothic furniture at all?
I'm a fan of I'm a fan of the real thing. I have very conflicted feelings about revivals. I mean, I think people probably unfairly accuse this era, the 19th century and particularly the Victorian era, as being the kind of the first instance of revivals, but that's not really true. There were certainly revivals before then. Neoclassicism itself is a historical revival, just pulling from a very distant history. But I do have conflicting feelings about some of this revivalism, especially because, of course, it's all quite fanciful. I mean, I don't think historical accuracy is anything you could ever place on really any of this work. So, but it's fine. I mean, and some of it's wonderful. I mean, I would say the best of it is wonderful.
AA, would you have a goth? I know you're a big mid-century fan, so maybe the fussiness would not appeal to you in natural sense.
Well, I mean, I'd need to actually be able to sit on it, and I'd be obviously worried about the age of the one on the right there, but yeah, I mean, it looks all right to me. Are they? I mean, is he self-consciously trying to ape a particular period here? Is it like the medieval era or the Middle Ages, or?
That's right. So like I was saying, so basically, he said he thinks that the High Gothic period is the best because it's the time where people cared about what they were doing. There was more of these handicrafts, and so I'm just going to basically copy the past. And that's that is an interesting point where Pugin wanted nothing more than Gothic. He said this was kind of like peak civilization. We should do nothing more or nothing less than this. I want Gothic all the time, 100% of the time as well. So, which can be pretty intense.
It's kind of interesting as well. I mean, I sorry to keep on bringing up Carlyle, but he also had this, like, he looked back to the medieval era in Past and Present, most famously, as a kind of inspiration of when there was a kind of moral unity between the ruling class and the people, when things worked, when people cared about things. And I actually kind of find it quite interesting that I think there's still some of this buried in mainstream Marxism. One of the things that I wasn't aware of is just how much the young Marx and Engels were influenced by this stuff. I found a review of Past and Present by Engels, who said, and I quote, he said, hold on, let me see if I can find it. Carlyle's book is 10,000 times more worth translating into German than all the legions of English novels. And of course, he was talking about, the treatment of the condition of England, but also this kind of romantic or nostalgic yearning to go back to the artisanal period, and I think that's still there in mainstream Marxism. Not in Ashtar Carr's like fully automated luxury communism, but in the kind of old school Marxism where they, there's a fundamental distrust of automation in general.
Well, it's interesting. I saw a book like someone had surveyed Labour MPs in 1910, and their top 5 books were like the Bible, Carlyle, Ruskin, Dickens. So, I think when we're looking at this movement, it is inevitably tied into and very strongly tied into socialism. But I feel like they sort of lose the God part. I think that's maybe they lose the transcendent element to it. It's almost kind of like Carlyle.
Yeah,
Carlyle went out.
I also think that as much as our friend Evelyn likes to simp for Lenin and so on, and as does Amy on Women's Hour for some reason, I think the impact of the Bolsheviks on Marxist thought is a kind of modernist split in there. Like they're like, oh, because they're like, how can I put it? The Bolsheviks wanted to inculcate an artificial industrial revolution because it was a necessary phase towards communism. So there's this weird accelerationist idea in Marxist Leninism that is somehow absent in these earlier socialists who actually are looking backwards, not forwards.
There's a kind of pro-technology versus anti-technology.
I actually did find a relevant quotation from this famous Carlyle essay, Sign of the Times, which may actually sum up what we're talking about, about the age of machinery. He said, "The emblems of the machine age are the factory, where the living artisan is driven from his workshop to make room for a speedier, inanimate one, the steamship and the railway. There is no end to machinery. Even the horse is stripped of his harness and finds a fleet fire horse yoked in his stead. Nay, we have an artist that hatches chickens by steam. The very brood hen is to be superseded. For all earthly and for some unearthly purposes, we have machines and mechanistic furtherances for mincing our cabbages, for casting us into magnetic sleep. We remove mountains and make seas our smooth highway. Nothing can resist us. We war with rude nature, and by our resistless engines come off always victorious and loaded with spoils. When we can drain the ocean into mill ponds and bottle up the force of gravity to be sold by retail in gas jars, then may we hope to comprehend the infinitudes of man's soul under formulas of profit and loss, and rule over this too as over a patent engine by checks and valves and balances." So you can see there's this idea that the very process of automation, what some people would actually call progress, capital P progress, was seen as like an enemy of all that is vital and good in the world. Some part of me reminds me of that old Evola meme, though. It's like, might we make life a bit easier? And he's like, no, because it's like on the one hand, you can see where they're getting at with this, but on the other hand, there's the sheer practicality of, the autumn. I mean, this is the whole carrot pill debate all over again. It's like, well, yeah, but if you did away with if you went back to horses and did away with the mechanized transport and so on, you'd have no choice but to go back to this life of toil. And of course, someone like Carlyle just saw that as an inherent good. It's like labor is this kind of it's manifest with some like divine spirit or godlike power, and leisure is bad, and in his conception of the world. But it's like, well, do you want to go back to such a hard agricultural life? So. Yeah, I'm always conflicted by this kind of strain in their thinking.
And I think actually, like, I don't know what the solution is to that, but I think this is actually one of the big questions of our age, because I feel like there must be more breadth to it than either we have technology or we don't have technology. And I think there is something about the types of technology, or because it's not. Technology is not evil. It's not even in the fact that different things have enable different elements from technology. This is sort of what I tried to talk about on my event talk ages ago last year. Right, buy your ticket for the event this year, by the way, right now. Where again, certain technologies enable aesthetic abilities. You can make more beautiful things with them, while some technology focuses on efficiency, making things faster. But I wonder if there's like a third way with technology where we need to sort of reassess our interaction with it, but not to say that all technology is the same, because there's enabling technology that is genuinely useful. And like, for example, I always think of the woodcrafter's chisel. Just that one small piece of steel allows you to do an infinite number of designs and craft, and make things. You can make mortars and tenon joints, etc. And before that, you would have literally like a flint axe, which you couldn't do much with, basically. So you're able to create not just a better environment in terms of like material wealth, but also that transcendent wealth. But there was one thing I wanted to bring up, which the word rude in Carlyle's, he talked about the rude nature, and that's something that we'll talk about later with Ruskin, maybe a little bit. But it's this idea of rudeness is like roughness, is how they would talk about it in the Victorian times. And this idea that what technology does is to smooth things over, it makes things easy. And again, I think one thing that these guys are trying to do is to not go down the easy path. They want things to kind of be rough or have vitality with it. And again, I think that's the big challenge of our age. Everything is so sterile. Everything is so perfect. With Photoshop, I can create 1,000 perfect circles, while in the past it would have been so hard. You spend your life work would be able to to create a perfect circle or something like that. So that's maybe something else we need to look at. But I think I think your point around, we can't just say technology is bad, let's reject it. It's a non-starter in my opinion, because you always ask the question, how far back do you go? Do you literally go back to, full return to monkey? There's an arbitrary point where you say technology is good.
I also, I mean, just writing this article, I have detected a few moments where I wouldn't say Carlyle's a hypocrite, but he's certainly contradictory. So, for example, he rails against the machine age, but he's perfectly happy to take all the money for the many thousands of copies of his books were. And like, how does he deal with this? And he just like, I found this quote where he just says, "I avoid all booksellers, see them rarely, the blockheads, never study never to think of them at all." So he's just like, yeah, you just go off and sell my books, and bring me back hundreds and thousands of pounds, and I'll just treat you with utter disdain. So it's just like, I mean, but there's no attempt to reconcile that with, or for example, on like the big issues of the day, there was the repeal of the Corn Laws going on. Okay. And Carlyle was actually surprisingly really against the Corn Laws, and he lobbied the government and used like all of his friends, which includes a lot of these literary characters who were in that circle, because they knew everybody who was anybody, right? And they knew people in America as well. And they were basically lobbying the government to import cheap American corn. There's even an essay I found called Indian Meal, where him and Mrs. Carlyle were trying to find, because there was a corn shortage, right, due to the corn laws. They were actually trying to find recipes to make like ersatz American style corn, like to replicate the sweetness. So they were actually trying to get like cheap American grain imports, which is what happened to feed the workers, because they were all dying, of course, or they were living in abject poverty, and it was just like, well, in this particular case, the drivers of necessity, he's perfectly happy to, be like, well, okay, lower the trade restrictions, let free trade come in, use all of your mechanical ships and things to bring the grain over in, by the ton and so on. And again, there's no attempt to reconcile any of that stuff with this kind of anti-technology stance. So you do end up thinking sometimes that is this kind of luxury romantic view in a way. Dee, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this question of how to reconcile the almost like hard Uncle Ted stance with just the necessity of life,
Well, I think there's I think that it's there's a fondness of sort of writers and thinkers to engage in this kind of hyperbole, I would say, and I mean, everyone is obviously always going to be a hypocrite. I mean, you attach a wheel into something. I mean, the wheel is technology, so you go back to a time before before the wheel. I mean, if you want to live as a purist, but I think a lot of this stuff tends to be more ways of thinking about things. You sort of jump on this extreme this extreme sort of taking your theory to its absolute limit, as a way to kind of get people to think about things, in their own life, and maybe not really, seriously wanting to use these things as descriptions of how to live. Because certainly Carlyle, I mean, I've seen Carlyle's house. He's not going to he's not going to want to live in a medieval peasant's hovel. He just isn't. Yeah, it's a difficult one. I would say that if the writer is cognizant of the fact that these things are necessarily kind of intellectual exercises, then that's okay. But we're all going to we all live in hypocrisy, just as we all live in in sin. No matter how much you strive, your being in the world is always going to be a compromise of that nature. So
yeah, I mean, I guess the real question is, can you have automation without what Guinan later calls the reign of quantity taking over? Because this is the thing that a lot of these guys are railing against, is it's this kind of brute scientistic utilitarianism where everything becomes this kind of efficiency calculation, and the sense of everything else is just lost. So the question is, can you have the benefits of what they called industrialism and so on without any of these drawbacks to basically your soul? Because it's, I mean, we struggle with the same thing now. I was struck by reading through a lot of this sort of material, just how many of the complaints still apply to our life, now very recognizably, where there is no sense of any of these kind of transcendent things that we're talking about, or these higher ideals, because it's all like everything's lowest common denominator.
And in my mind, there's two things you could do, and that's one is to decouple technology from the ideas of progress, because it's always, after you've created something, it's, well, how can we do it even better? How can we make it even stronger, faster, etc.? So that's one suggestion is I I think you have to fundamentally disable the market, or maybe even control, like how technology is made in the marketplace, is what I'm suggesting. Like because a free market, which focuses on money, will always end up in a long enough period of time focusing on quantity and efficiency. And I think that's the fundamental thing that I've always thought about.
So what would you do? Like install, like, I don't know, like base and red pill people as almost like commissars to oversee. Like how would you actually do this?
Well,
at a company level.
Yeah, well, in the past it would just be like the local the king or whatever would say that I don't like the way that this is going. You know, like what's it? You know, literally the Russians banning the printing press and stuff like that. Again, I'm just using that as an example. I'm not saying that that's what I would do, but yeah, I think you'd have to put in laws around the market itself where you don't focus on well, there's like a drag effect on companies that focus on efficiency, and again, I don't have a necessary policy around that, but I think if you look at history, the consequence of a free market is consolidation and efficiency, which is a problem. Certainly in terms of this, and there's other problems as well.
Carlyle's answer famously, of course, was to hope basically that somehow the quote unquote captains of industry would become enlightened. Well, I hate to take the word enlightened, but would think more like he does. But then you're kind of like the whole system's contingent on, you know, a Henry Ford or a Bournville or whoever just sharing your sympathies. Well, as we can see today, that how can we?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because, of course, I mean, the figure I think of in terms of the enlightened captain of industry from this period, or slightly before this period, is Josiah Wedgwood. You know, who was a potter who founded a quite enduring pottery of his own. You know, and again, he was both focused on sort of I would say the aesthetic perfection of the objects produced by his manufactory, but also by, you know, increasing, you know, efficiency and yield and introducing, you know, all sorts of new technologies. He was also quite interested in social matters, as I think we've discussed before. Certainly his involvement with the abolition of slavery movement. You know, or someone like Matthew Boulton, who was another industrialist of that period, who, you know, again, there was this very early idea that these men of taste, you know, would be supplying to this, you know, kind of certain strata of society, and they would maintain this sort of excellence, this aesthetic excellence, in the midst of producing, you know, sort of producing more and better objects. But I mean, of course, the whole reason that we're talking about this is because I would say the industrialization allowed lower classes to think about aesthetics for the first time ever. You know, I mean, it allowed people to collect vases. It allowed people to, you know, to have sort of colored wallpapers and things that would have been impossible even 100 years before this. And so I think it democratized the idea of an aesthetic life, and that has both its positive and negative consequences.
I mean, there's a hidden factor which kind of limits the Wedgwoods or whoever, which is the idea of competition, because you have this the market, you know, the logic of the market. Probably the best example I can think of is when Henry Ford said, listen, the Model T is black, all right? Ford cars are black. Don't fucking ask me to change it. This is our design. This is our aesthetic. Famously, General Motors started bringing out multicolored cars. You know, oh, you can have a red one, you can have a blue one. And Ford was like, no, I'm not doing it. But in the end, the General Motors started out selling Ford. So they were basically forced to say, okay, now you can have a Ford in red or blue or whatever else. And it was only a matter of time that even a man as stubborn as Ford would have to just give in to the logic of the market. And now his aesthetic has gone. Now you might say, well, the colors are arbitrary, but this is essentially an aesthetic choice that he had, right?
Yeah.
So,
and there was a very good, by the way, it wasn't just obstinance on the part of Ford. I mean, that finish was much easier to achieve using black pigment than it would be with anything else. It was called the Japanning, a Japan color, Japanning process. And it's a whole sort of chemical and mechanical process that produces a very hard finish. And it at that time, it was very difficult to do that process with colors. There just weren't that many pigments that would be capable of standing up to that process and to make that tough finish. So there was a utility reason behind that. But of course, you're right. I mean, you once your competitor starts producing, colored cars, you're going to have to give in. And it's the same with all of these manufacturers.
And you see, I even feel this pressure on the deepest law, D. I look across the view counts and so on, and be like, well, T.S. Eliot, he's only getting 3,000, whereas bloody Furious talking about seed oil's got 30,000. So I have to make an aesthetic choice to sacrifice even like there is a logic that the market's trying to push in a certain direction. You just have to withstand it all to be like, no, we're going to stubbornly talk about poetry and things like this.
but just looping this back to some of the ideas we're going to be talking today. So you're right. There are the tastemakers, as Dee called them, but there's also the populace as well. And I think it's the union of those two. If you didn't, because not all markets consist of people, right? And I can, through propaganda, as we established, we can change people's views on aesthetics. And again, the perfect consumer in for the let's just say the man of quantity is the bugman, for example. And so he tries to create a market of bugmen. But I think what the arts and crafts movement was trying to do was to get people thinking about aesthetics again and say, actually, I'm not going to choose just the cheapest thing. I'm going to choose something that is beautiful and true and good. So that there is this other element. There are the tastemakers that lead us forward, but you've got to take the people with you as well. But all of the tools of propaganda, so to speak, are in the hands of utility right now, and I think that's one of the other big problems.
Okay, shall we?
Yeah. Let's keep on going through. I've just got a couple of examples of just some of the manufacturing processes as well. So Pugin brought back the inlaid tiles. So you can see these look like medieval tiles you'd see in an old.
Very medieval, yeah.
Yeah, but he basically tried to reinvent the process to do that. So you can see that it consists of multiple colors, which you use kind of like these wooden dyes, which embed into clay, and then you kind of put in the different colors. So it's not just about aesthetics. That's going to skin deep. The actual ways of doing things they're attempting to kind of bring back at the same time. If you keep on.
These tiles, by the way, they're not just glazed with these designs. The design's actually a part of the body of the tile.
I will say though that even with this, how do you stop some, Bobus Higgins sausage maker on the great scale just saying like, look, I found a way to just make a knockoff replica of this, and we're going
they did. I mean, this is the thing. Of course, these were very laborious to produce. But then someone says, well, why can't I just print the design, do it as an underglaze and glaze the tiles? And of course, they're much less, they're much less durable, and then they have much less intense colors. But that's what happened. You're absolutely right. I mean, these are called encaustic tiles, by the way. Encaustic referring to an ancient technique of painting with using waxes, but it sort of was used to describe these because they were produced in the kiln. They were produced under heat.
Yeah, it's actually yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's like what they're called. These are actually quite popular today under the name of encaustic or cement tiles. So people create a similar effect by coloring cement. Very, very, very in vogue in the kind of southern Italian and Spanish style.
Yeah. And the Houses of Parliament have famously Minton tiles of this type. In many of the sort of public sections. So
Yeah, so let's move on to the kind of second big thinker to do with the arts and crafts movement. And of course, that's my friend Ruskin. I've done John Ruskin SC, Eights Liberals, Eights Merchants, Eights Industrial Revolution, loves Turner, loves medieval, loves Carlyle, simple as. He rose to fame with his series of on modern painters, in which he kind of launched Turner's career on a national scale. But his big work related to this was The Stones of Venice, which was a three book, I would say, autistic look at the architecture of Venice, which was the city he thought was the most beautiful, where he takes you on a journey from the very first buildings created there through the different phases for Roman onwards to the medieval period. But I'd say Ruskin is very similar to Carlyle, where both of them do not lay out their proposition in a very succinct or specific way. They wouldn't have here's what I believe, boom, 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 boom. Ruskin will be talking about like pillars, and then he'll go off on like a tangent talking about how they're created, etc. And that's where the gold is. And it reminds me of Carlyle in a similar way. It's this kind of off comment about something totally unrelated that's kind of like blows you away.
Do you want some deep lore on the Ruskin Carlyle relationship that came out of my research for this biography? Well, not by the article that I'm currently writing. So one of the funny things was when Carlyle brought out the occasional discourse on the Negro question and the latter-day pamphlets. Incidentally, I always thought the latter-day pamphlets meant this is Carlyle in his latter days writing, but he didn't mean it that way. He actually meant it. These are the latter days of civilization. We're in a dying culture, these are the end times. Like we're living in the Kali Yuga is how he meant it, But when he fell out with a lot of his old liberal friends like John Stuart Mill and people like that, Ruskin actually intensified his Carlyle love, which is quite based, I thought, well, they actually became quite close. They wrote to each other. And Ruskin, as late as 1873, would address him as dearest Carlyle, and also my dearest Papa, which I thought was which I thought was interesting.
Daddy Carlyle.
He was particularly influenced by past and present, and he was basically, this was like pretty open. He said that he was trying to do past and present in other forms, basically, like to do like what Carlyle had done, I guess, in literature, in art, in crafts, in whatever other fields. He loved that idea of the using the 12th century or the medieval abbot as an inspiration of a kind of how society, a well-functioning society, should be. They did fall out though. Also, Carlyle support, it wasn't just a one-way relationship. Obviously, Carlyle was older than Ruskin by 20 years or something. Maybe even 20, maybe even older than that. But he did support Ruskin the other way around. Like he kind of, and that was important because I don't know if you can. People may underestimate the fact that this was like having. I'm trying to think of it like it'd be like almost like
the Godfather's blessing, I think, isn't it? Like the Don.
I'm trying to think of an equivalent example. Like I hesitate to say Jordan Peterson, but somebody with that sort of platform, right? If Carlyle was behind you, everybody knew, So that was like quite significant that even in, especially by the 1870s, Carlyle was being invited for interviews with Queen Victoria and turning down knighthoods and all the rest of it by that point in his career. So it was actually pretty significant that Ruskin had this kind of blessing, but I think they did end up falling out over something.
They're both quite cantankerous people, I think. So classic disagreeability.
Also, based Ruskin. Do you remember there was that governor who was governor? the guy who was being persecuted for his treatment of, he was the governor of Haiti or whatever it was, governor.
Oh yes, yeah.
Well, they formed this defense league around him, and Ruskin was right there with him as well, which I thought, based. But then I can't remember what they fell out over. It was some act that happened where Carlyle was like really against it, and Ruskin wasn't that keen on it. But they didn't fall out that badly because they were still calling each other, "We are in a minority of two," in their views. They used to say, to the extent where Ruskin has been called Carlyle's only disciple. So yes, I just thought that was it. So there's actually a very close connection between the two of them, closer than I had actually realized before.
Yeah, and he just repackages a lot of the ideas, but like you said, I think Ruskin reads like a preacher, and some of the stuff is very electrifying if you've heard it for the first time. So definitely but you have to sort of get to the good bits, if that makes sense. There's always a build up. But as I was saying, so this kind of middle book 2 of Stones of Venice blew everyone away. It was the specific chapter, the nature of Gothic, where the premise of the chapter is he's talking about what makes up the Gothic imagination, the Gothic mind, etc. And he kind of lists out the various points. But during it, if you scroll down, there's a whole lot of discussion around the quality, comparing the past to the present. And the first thing he wants to bring up is how buildings in the past were created where it was a collaboration between the top and the bottom, where the master builder would have the vision. There wasn't an architect. It would be like the master mason or the master builder. He would have a vision for the building, and then it could be several of them because they would take generations to make. But then the craftsman would also contribute. They would be given space to use their skills and ability, and the master builder wouldn't say to the craftsman, "I want this here or this there." Today you've got the idea of like the kind of architect controlling every small little detail. There is that space for creativity and for the lower to work in union with the upper.
Sorry, I've just stumbled on this. We were talking about Carlyle and Ruskin. I didn't realize that Ruskin also occasionally offered base critiques of Carlyle's works.
Go on.
He wrote in his, in On Heroes that Carlyle praises Muhammad.
Oh yes, yeah.
Ruskin wrote in his diary, "Bombast, I think, altogether approves of Mamohat and talks like a girl of his black eyes." he did not approve of the Muhammad simping in On Heroes.
Yeah. I mean, that's the worst chapter as well. Anyway, that's another discussion.
Anyway, carry on.
So this is one concept. So he was trying to say, look, the upper and the lower, and why don't we do this today? Everything's controlled top down, and the craftsman doesn't input anything in the same kind of way. That was his first point. The second is the kind of the goal of perfection. And if you scroll down, there's this quite famous quote from this. So it's a bit long, so apologies. So here he's talking about glass production. So like glasses we drink from. Our modern glass is exquisitely clear in its substance, true in its form, accurate in its cutting. We are proud of this. We ought to be ashamed of it. The old Venetian glass was muddy, inaccurate in all of its forms, and clumsily cut, if at all. And the old Venetian was justly proud of it. For there is a difference between the English and the Venetian workman, that the former thinks only of the accurately matching of his patterns, and getting his curves perfectly true and his edges perfectly sharp, and becoming the mere machine for rounding curves and sharpening edges, while the old Venetian cared not a whit whether his edges were sharp or not, but he invented a new design for every glass that he made, and never moulded a handle or a lip without a new fancy to it. And therefore, though some Venetian glass is ugly and clumsy enough, when made by clumsy and uninventive workmen, other Venetian glass is so lovely in its forms that no price is too great for it, and we never see the same form of it twice. Now you cannot have the finish and the varied form too. If the workman is thinking about his edges, he cannot be thinking about his design, and if of his design he cannot think of his edges. Choose whether you will pay for the lovely form or the perfect finish. Choose at the same moment whether you will make the workman a man or a grindstone. So it's this idea about in the industrial process, the man is becoming a machine, while the craftsmen of the past had that ability to kind of make their mark on the work.
I would dispute this a bit because I've seen plenty of Venetian glass from the past that it is beautifully perfect in its workmanship and quite inventive. I mean, I think he was maybe talking quite generally.
Exactly, and like it's I'm sure if you did a deep and I do love Victorian cut glass at the same time, but I guess his point was around this kind of bottom to top viewpoint as well. Why aren't the craftsmen able to make their mark? And this passage was a revolution and caused a great stir, a lot of thought, and basically inspired a generation of people to go on to say, actually, craft is important. Why isn't these the people making the objects leaving their little fingerprint on it? There's something else he tried to do as well. If you scroll down AA a little bit.
By the way, various audio artists in chat have been complaining that you're a bit muffled. I don't know if you can move your mic or something.
Sorry, I'll try and bring it closer. Here's another passage from Unto This Last, which is a little bit later in the 60s. I believe most firmly that as the laws of national prosperity get familiar to us, we shall more and more cast our toil into social and communicative systems, that one of the first means of doing so will be the re-establishment of guilds of every important trade in a vital, not formal condition. So it's not just about the craftsman as well. He tried to... I'm pretty sure that Ruskin's one of the first people to advocate for re-bringing back the guild system as a way of bringing creators and craftsmen together in a formalized setting. And so one of the practical things he did, he's not just theory, was to create, if we scroll down, the St. George's Guild. He basically gave around about £70,000 to the Guild of St. George to buy up some land, some cottages, and to kind of let some kind of craftsmen create this kind of community of people. Now, sadly, Ruskin went into kind of had some let's say mental problems after this was created, so he didn't contribute any more cash to it. But interestingly, it does actually still exist today in a different entity. So it was kind of this idea of how can we try and fight against industrial society, and his answer to that was to Trumpton. He literally tried to create a version of Trumpton where they had the land, they had the buildings, etc. But it was never, I would say, a big success, and didn't really have a big aesthetic impact either, interestingly. So you often talk about Evola's mentioning of the guild system, AA. So I was going to ask, what's your, does that kind of match up with some of his ideas?
Yeah, I mean, there is this. I mean, you can see why the idea of the guild system would be attractive, because there's also a set of protections in there as well, for doing things a certain way, and also the idea of the apprenticeship building up mastery, right? Building up mastery. But my immediate thought here with Dee on the line is, I can imagine a lot of artists now, including Dee, perhaps, I mean, I don't want to speak for him, may actually feel constrained by a guild, because you're basically, being made to do things a certain way. And I think that people now have this tendency of thinking about the artist as this kind of, kind of mode of freedom. And I actually wonder if this is a kind of hidden, a kind of liberal notion of what the artist is this kind of unchained spirit who can.
Oh yes, I mean
there is.
I've talked about this before. That there is, that is purely this idea of the kind of individual alone, sort of drawing out content from, from his mighty arse, and and bestowing it upon the world without any antecedents or precedents. But I also would agree that the idea of a guild, I mean, it's not for me, and it certainly wouldn't be for me. But I mean, we have a lot of these kind of constraints. They remain. They just get transferred, or they get sort of hidden. I mean, there of course is a canon of expectations that is placed upon your average kind of postmodern gallery artist, that is every bit as strict and unyielding as any other kind of canon of expectations that a guild would, a formal guild would put on them. But I do tend to think these things serve a certain type of artist better than another one. They would certainly serve, the type of artists working within a kind of tradition and within the kind of constraints of a framework. I mean, like a craftsman, like an illuminator, an illustrator. But I think that it's not a bad idea.
I mean, I suppose that is a question though. To what extent does art school, quote unquote, replace the idea of because it is kind of like doing your apprenticeship, if you want. I mean, I also think of the modern creative writing department.
It's the world's shittest guild, basically.
They are guilds, aren't they? I mean,
horrible. Yes, they're trained. Yes, they're training young artists to be the kind of mediocrities who will fit in with the modern international art gallery scene. Yeah.
I mean, I mean, speaking as someone who has written a bit of poetry and so on, and has met a lot of let's just say aspiring young writers. Certainly in that field, I feel like people kind of do it anyway, right? I mean, I went through a whole period where I was just self-consciously trying to ape John Donne, and then I went through a phase where I was trying to be like an Ezra Pound, and then you go through another phase where all you're really doing is aping the masters, right? But you kind of put yourself through that just anyway, and I just wonder like the extent to which a guild system would be different from the tendency of young people. I mean, I don't know if people do that in painting. I imagine they do, though. I imagine
yes,
and go through phases where they copy Picasso.
Or absolutely. Every young artist goes through that, and they always have done. I mean, in fact, you see, in history, you will see artists who, if their name isn't known, they'll be referred to as like School of Rembrandt or Circle of, Rembrandt or so and so and so. And you have these kind of groups of artists in specific places whose work was just a kind of riff on the great artist of the day in their city, and it's perfectly fine. I mean, and then there's some wonderful work that's produced by those people. But yes, I mean, and of course, a classical art education also involved literally copying the works of past masters. When you would be an apprentice in an artist's studio in, say, the Renaissance in Italy, your task would literally be to learn how to paint like the master, because you would be doing parts of the master's work for him. I mean, once you graduate from 2 years of grinding pigments and emptying the bedpans, you would be painting, you would be painting foliage, or you would be painting drapery or such, and you would learn how to paint like your master. And then of course, if you were very clever, you would go off at some point and you would have your own contribution, and you would then have your own studio. But yes, I mean, I think that's a natural thing for all creative people to do. It's just that some people never grow out of it,
But just going back on as to the strength of the guilds, you get all of that with the guild system. You get that kind of apprenticeship, the passing down from master, but you also get control of the market, because the people who were only the masters were allowed to create their own workshops, and you could only be a master if you got approval from other members of the guild. So you have this kind of system where if you're all on the same page, or like again your fundamental ideas, it's like a form of gatekeeping, so to speak. And I think that's a really actually deep thought around, today's universities are a guild of sorts, where again there's this credentialism where you've been to a certain guild, certain art school or whatever, you've got your kind of guild qualifications, and people in those schools, if you try to do kind of more traditional styles, you will be kicked out or you will be marked down. We hear about that especially in the architecture circles. So there is that kind of strong gatekeeping in place. Now, I wonder whether there's value in this for our circles, for the continuation of ideas. What do you do in a world which hates beauty? What do you do in a world which the current guild systems will try and squeeze you out and remove you? there's a form of parallelism in there. I think where Ruskin goes wrong is, number one, he sort of set it up and then left, and you need that strong guiding hand managing it all. Again, almost like that captain of industry or the kind of the guild master. And number two, you need he wasn't in the same situation. We're in a very much different landscape where I think the passing on of those skills is very important.
Mm-hmm. I've also thought, just thinking about mass culture a moment as well, because I've noticed some people in the chat saying like mass culture makes all these things moot. But I was even thinking about how the BBC used to function versus the kind of versus what we see today, which is a total fragmentation where everybody's off doing their own thing. So there is no there is no central culture anymore.
Yeah.
This is an odd thought, right? And you may say, well, yes, this is but the culture you're describing is bankrupt, right? But at least it was a culture. I'm thinking about growing up when everybody used to watch Only Fools and Horses, for example, or whatever it happened to be. There were 20, 30 million people engaged in the same activity, and that kind of created a weird glue that kind of helped keep. But now there is nothing like that. Now it's like
there was Game of Thrones.
Well,
don't bring that up now. Don't bring that up now.
For all of a split second, there was Game of Thrones. But
yeah.
Even Game of Thrones was, international. It was transatlantic. It wasn't. I'm talking about something that is unique to this. I always bring up that point when I went to the Queen's Jubilee and EastEnders came on. You could say, well, yeah, what a ridiculous moment. Yeah, everybody sat down and watched EastEnders together. But it was also like one of the only moments I've seen like a kind of shared culture that everybody was a part of. That was true in 2002, but I just don't think it would happen now, because nobody watches EastEnders anymore. Nobody watches anything anymore together, So, even at the level of a mass culture, you could say, well, the BBC was subverted, or the BBC was the BBC, gate kept out right-wing content or whatever, but it was still performing a certain function for the society itself, which it has now, I reckon, resigned. It no longer does that. It now just tries to ape what the commercial channels are doing.
Well, it's interesting. They've got things like like the BBC Asian Network or BBC One Extra. Specific channels and content targeted for different communities. And I think it's like your idea. There's like a shopping list. You can buy whatever you want. You can have a super micro niche at any time. So you're right, that unity's lost, and there is a consequence of that, where you need a certain number of people or a certain sway behind a cultural force for it to be successful, or to have the funding to actually achieve anything. So
all right, shall we carry on?
Yeah, sure.
Well, are we leaving Ruskin?
We are leaving Ruskin.
Okay, I just want to register my thoughts about Ruskin, that he's a deep and absolute villain of this period, and I hate him.
Why is he a villain, D?
Well, I have numerous reasons for that, but the biggest one is, of course, his famous run-in with James Abbott McNeill Whistler, who is an artist I quite admire, and who people will know. He's a very, very famous artist. Ruskin and he had a bit of a disagreement over a painting in which Ruskin sort of used his journalistic reach to trash, and Whistler sued him for libel, and it was quite a famous case in its day. And Whistler won. He won the case, but he won. His award was 1 farthing, and he still had to pay court costs. So even though he won the case, it absolutely ruined him. And I think the contention was that Ruskin had used his that he had used his position to kind of rubbish Whistler's work and damaged his career. I mean, and the problem with it that I have is, of course, if you think of Ruskin associated with Turner, I mean, there were many works in Turner's oeuvre that are just as difficult and contentious as the work that Ruskin, the work of Whistler that Ruskin didn't like. And so I would say it was more a sense of, I don't know, hypocrisy, jealousy, what motivated it. But I've always thought of Ruskin as a villain because of what he did to Whistler's career. And Whistler never really recovered from that whole episode.
That's actually scurrilous lies. He went on to produce loads of works afterwards. And then, interestingly, Whistler never went back to that style again, so he learned his lesson. The fundamental question is, should a critic be allowed to say what he likes? And the answer was, it was a huge deal, because this effectively said there is a restraint on what a critic can say. And again, like if you read the short paragraph of what Ruskin said about Whistler's work, he describes it as a few daubs of paint. I mean, if you think that description was libelous, I think you have to be laughing. When you talk about the effect it had on Whistler, Ruskin literally went into like a mental health breakdown after this, and declared at the end of critiquing, because
good
the law courts had said you can no longer say what you like about a piece of artwork. For a totally, again, this is like the narcissistic artist never wanting to be criticized for his work
by a disgusting art critic. I mean, the lowest form of humanity. You're not even good enough to be a literary critic. You're an art critic. Ugh. Anyway, sorry.
I will say that somehow Carlyle remained friends with Whistler, and he did a very famous portrait.
Well,
of Carlyle.
exactly. So strangely enough, yes, Carlyle did probably the best painted portrait of Whistler ever. In fact, that portrait.
Yeah.
Of Carlyle
Whistler did it of Carlyle. Sorry.
Yeah. Yes. Whistler did the portrait of Carlyle, and that portrait of Carlyle is the companion painting to the painting that people call Whistler's Mother, which is called Arrangement in Black and Grey #1. The Carlyle painting is called Arrangement in Black and Grey #2. And they were neighbors. I mean, Carlyle and Whistler lived quite close to each other. And, and I just imagining the kind of conversations that they had, because they were two very different men.
That wasn't in the abstract style that Whistler was criticised for. So, like I said, I think he learned his lesson and produced some of his best work.
Nocturne in Black and Gold is not abstract.
If you know anything about Sartre or Rosatis, by the way, it's kind of funny, Carlyle's comment on that Whistler painting. He said, Whistler paid too much attention to his clothes. His anxiety seemed to be to get the coat painted to ideal perfection. The face went for little, said Carlyle. So, curmudgeonly the old Carlyle.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and certainly Whistler. I mean, there were certainly many things about Whistler that you could certainly point to as hilarious idiocy, but it's all in good fun.
Right. So we move on to Morris here. So one of the readers of Stones of Venice was a young William Morris. He was due to go into.
Oh my God! He looks like Theoden King. My God! Look, it's the same man. Anyway, carry on.
I found the most dishevelled photo of Morris I could find. And basically he was so inspired. Him and Burne-Jones were both going to enter the clergy, and they said, "Oh no, we're going to stop this. We're going to become artists." Now, Morris started out as a poet, as a short story writer, but came to prominence with his creation of his design business, Morris and Co. So yeah, he was a Ruskinite. He loved the kind of medieval period. I called him a PRB adjacent. He sort of knew the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood guys they'd been going for like 10 years before Morris was on the scene. And obviously William Morris is a well-known socialist in the 1880s, got involved in a lot of socialist movements, but was actually very rich. His father was very rich. He's kind of like an Engels-like character, I would say. But also he was a very ruthless businessman. I'll maybe talk about more on that in a second. He was also a small to medium enterprise owner by Foundations of Entrepreneurship. Just a little plug I got in there. But like I said, his major thing was Morris & Co. So if you scroll down, Morris & Co. I'm pretty sure that anyone who is interested in design would know about it. Made in '61. It actually started out with like Morris, Burke, and there's two other guys involved.
Yeah.
Within 6 years, he basically took full control over the company in an absolutely brutal move where he removed the shares of his other partners and took full authoritative control in the most anti-socialist move of all time. It was literally hilarious. Kind of based, I got to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But
what can men do against such reckless hate?
Stop it.
And on the picture on the left, the reason put in there is that was his first store across there. Now, the reason why Morris & Co. is interesting was that while Ruskin had the idea, Morris put it into practice. And so he began by learning lots of medieval practices and said, look, I'm going to create a store that only does handmade items. And this is the first true and proper arts and crafts, like goods for real. So if you're going to scroll down, you can kind of see just some of the practices he brought back. This is some tapestry weaving going on right now in the old French style. So you can see the people on the looms there. Note they're all men as well. Morris literally went back and tried to learn traditional styles. He did use some technology with some of his fabrics, but it's all about this idea of the handcrafted, so that every single item would have this kind of the mark of the craftsman on it at the same time.
Do Morris, sorry, do Morris still do that today, or do they mass produce things now?
No. So basically, they went into administration in the 20s. We'll talk about it later. The whole arts and craft movement got wiped out in the First World War because all of the craftsmen got killed. But the name was bought up by a large manufacturer. I've got a slide in here in a second to show my comments on that. So
all of these great brands. I mean, like Wedgwood it has nothing to do with Wedgwood of the past. It just became a brand.
Yeah. And some of his most famous work is his wallpapers. And
did you notice my avatar today, Ferro?
Yes, I know. Again, you have to zoom in to see it, but it's got a Morris print on the background.
It's the Morris puss, yeah.
Yeah. And just in terms of the process, this is all done by hand. So each thing is blocked several times for each color, and so again, you get the mark of the maker on it. Every single piece is different. Now, I would say you can actually buy this style wallpaper handmade still today. So that's some genuine Morris-esque in the wallpaper. It's about 150 quid a roll. So
very expensive.
Pretty expensive.
And very difficult to do. I mean, just the registration of this, getting everything to line up, getting the blocks to be perfectly printed is very, very difficult. So,
yeah. Okay, let's scoot on a little bit. And it's not just wallpaper. It was, again, the complete home. And another example was the Sussex chair. So this was based on examples from cottages locally, but he kind of created a design inspired on that was more to pattern. So again, lots of people would create these in Sussex by themselves in the past, but there wasn't like one singular design. So again, this idea of the modern designer, the designer chair, I think really was kind of crystallized in Morris. Now, what blows my mind is that he was selling, I worked out the prices. This was £56 in today's money. Now, if you like to scroll down, I'll show you what you can buy as an equivalent nowadays from IKEA on the left-hand side here, 50 quid. So on the right-hand side is a handcrafted, it's made of beech, hand rushed as well. Can you see the rush work on the chair? On the left is a screwed together pine trash from IKEA. And I genuinely think as the years go by, that again, the big promise of industrialization and liberalism is you're getting things cheaper. But I often think that there's definitely things that are cheaper. Like I think you can get a TV, you can get the internet, access to pornography cheaper than ever before. But some of our fundamentals have gotten way more expensive. And this is just one example where I think that there is a fundamental lie to this idea of progressive technology delivering cheaper things.
We'll just decline in one image right here.
Yeah. Oh, well, speaking of even going into the mid-century, so the Eames chairs, the wooden ones and the fiberglass ones, I believe were $25 when they were new. They were new. They were made to be, they were expensive for the time, but they were they were still affordable, and go and look at the price of those things now.
Yeah.
In Before
Okay.
Some Economics, Spurg says this is all down to inflation around timber since COVID, but still, yeah.
Well,
Yes.
hardwood's actually got cheaper if you know anything about wood carving. But again, I've done some more investigate. I'm going to do some more investigating on the architectural side, because I swear buildings have gotten more expensive to build, and not just because of regs as well. Just things have gotten more expensive.
Oh, they have. Oh, they absolutely have.
They're definitely more expensive to buy. I tell you that much.
Yeah, well, exactly. But also, like the fundamental elements, like a brick, is more expensive, even with all of our industrial processes and stuff. So something is going horribly wrong. Anyway, should we keep on plodding through? Now, he didn't just do stuff himself. He also worked with some of those PRB artists, like I said. Burne Jones, his companion at the time, very very famous Pre-Raphaelite, but also Dante Gabriel Rossetti, famous for his portraits of beautiful, strong-jawed medieval women. But actually, I think some of his best work is actually some of the Morris & Co. Windows that he did. So again, it's in a medieval style here, but I think that they're very beautiful. You can see St. George slaying the dragon across on the left-hand side. And as we know, this is not true, because St. George is a dusky brown Turkish immigrant.
He's a Turk, as they remind us every year. God's sake.
Factually incorrect. But again, all of this is handmade. So again, maybe Rossetti would do the design, but then you would have someone hand painting. The stained glass consists of glass cut to a specific shape, but then also there's a painting element to it as well. So everything's painted by hand. So you've got that. Every single piece is a work of art in its own right, if that makes sense. Okay, should we keep scrolling through? And I think his kind of peak works come in the 70s, quite late actually. So you've got this is my favorite Morris wallpaper. It's called Pimpernel, where it's a mastery of pattern, the way that things are copied. It's a very advanced pattern as well. It's known as a turnover. Can you see it down the center? There's a mirror in the actual pattern itself, and this is a medieval technique where you kind of copy one half of the design, and then it's stepped down at the same time. The repeating pattern stepped, so it gives you a large coverage area. So from a technical perspective, it's a complicated piece. You've also got there's sort of two patterns in here. You've got the flower and then the green leaves, but also there's like a darker, much more subtle pattern in the background. So you've kind of got two levels to the pattern itself. So yeah, Pimpernel is my favorite Morris work.
Barry, do I have time to make a quick diversion into a wallpaper related
Please do,
topic?
Sir.
This is very interesting to me, because of course Ferro mentioned this Pimpernel specifically in the green color. There's a sort of very interesting side issue that happened in the 19th century. I actually wanted to do a deep explore for a long time, in that I think that I have a theory that one of the developments of modern art was not so much, I mean, it's always kind of put down to the idea of photography sort of changing the nature of painting. But I think another great change that happened in the 19th century was the explosion in availability of new pigments. And, these new pigments inspired a lot of work that we associate with the 19th century, including Turner. As an example, but so basically before about 1800, the palette available to the artist or to the decorator, the printer, was very very limited. You had one bright red, you had no particularly stable yellows, you had no particularly stable greens. I mean, people will note the experience of going through an art museum, and you will often see landscape paintings made before a certain point, and they all look a bit brown. And the reason that they're brown is not because that's the way they were painted, it's because the green was quite unstable. Well, the 19th century, all of these new colors, which of course was concurrent with the revolution in industrialization and in chemistry, chemical engineering that had come about then. And there was suddenly all these new colors available, including greens. There was several new greens, and artists and manufacturers and such took advantage of them. Morris did as well. And unfortunately, the most popular of those greens was, well, there was a group of them. There was one called Sheila's green. There was another that ended up being called Paris green. But the problem with these colors is that they were arsenic pigments. So Sheila's green was copper arsenite, and Paris green, I think, was copper acetoarsenite. So they were related pigments. And they produce, I don't know if it's easy for you to switch over. I sent you on Twitter a DM of a picture of what this green looks like, AA. But it you know, again,
where?
Twitter DM. I DM the pictures of the wallpaper to you.
That hasn't come through.
Oh, I sent it to
Send it to
Pharaoh.
me. Sorry.
Yeah, I sent it to Pharaoh. I'll do it very quickly. I don't want to take up too much time with this, but you know, this became a huge issue because, of course, these colors were very, very popular. You know, the 19th century with the Morris wallpapers and all of this other work, it was becoming extraordinarily popular to decorate with these new colors that you'd never seen before. I mean, you know, literally many of the people who were pulling these, you know, who were using these colors had never really been exposed to colors like this before, other than in nature. Suddenly you can bring them home on your wall. But the arsenic pigments are quite dangerous. What happens is that if exposed to certain bacteria, the bacteria actually metabolize the pigment, and they create an organoarsenic compound, I think dimethyl arsenic acid, which is breathed by people. And in fact, it killed many people. There was a very early case of 4 children in Limehouse whose green wallpaper caused all of them to die. And the most famous case of a person being killed by wallpaper was possibly Napoleon Bonaparte, who had arsenic green wallpaper installed in his in Longhouse in St. Helena, and he you know, he died very painfully. Now, whether he died of arsenic poisoning is not known, but samples of his hair have been tested, and he had 100 times the modern levels of arsenic in his system. So there were consequences to these developments, and I just think it's very interesting that the Morris wallpapers were absolutely loaded with arsenic because, of course, he wanted to use those beautiful greens. But anyway, yeah, I like the dark side of these pigments. So if you're ever buying, if you ever you know, an antique shop or a flea market or something, and you come across anything of that sort of pale, bright green color that was produced before about 1920, you want to be very careful with it, because it more than likely is arsenic. It was the only green of that nature.
It's designed to die for.
Designed to die for. Yeah. So William Morris is actually a murderer.
Very interesting indeed. All right. So what now?
Yeah, let's keep on going. I've got a little slide in here for you next day, I think.
Oh, I've got 2 of those. Both have been destroyed by AAA.
Base
Both have been
AAA.
destroyed by.
Taking it off now. Hey, grown-ups.
As a curator of taste, she can recognise that this is exactly what Morris didn't want. So this is one of my criticisms with the modern Morris and Co. brand, is that they will literally license their prints out to anyone. I've seen it on I've seen it on butter dishes. I've seen it on coasters. I've seen
Horrible.
it on mugs. These just, again, the processes are horrible and nasty. These patterns were made for wallpapers, and look, because you can barely see anything. It's all so small on the on the butter dish. This is, I'm afraid to say, an aberration.
Ew.
But to be fair, no one knows what a butter dish is anymore. So maybe I'm just.
Oh.
I was referring to AA's various butter dish stories.
Oh yes,
butter
when
dish tales,
the woman didn't know what a butter dish was. I'm trying to remember what the butter dish that we have at the moment is. I think it may be a quote unquote Wedgwood one, D, but much the same story.
No.
I'm surprised.
A latter day Wedgwood.
Much the same story. Well, what do you do? You're in John Lewis. They only sell about 10 of them, and one of them is the Morris one, and one of them is the. Well, what do you get? What is a correct butter dish to get?
I think the Wedgwood. I think the Wedgwood would be better, unless
The Wedgwood would be better than the
yeah,
Morris.
because it's not got a print on it. Because again, if it's the Jasperware or whatever, it's quite bold to design. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like they've had to shrink the design, which was meant for a wallpaper, onto a tiny thing, so you can't see any of the detail, or the whole point of the print is lost. So it's just it's the fact that you've got a Morris item, and that's what I think it is. I'm afraid to say it's the gig man approach to life. It's the respectability of having your Morris item in the household, the gig manity.
These are only 12 quid, by the way.
And you can get you can get the wallpaper. You can get the properly, proper versions of the wallpaper. Which, by the way, I should point out that Morris wallpapers don't use arsenic pigments anymore. Nothing uses arsenic, although it's very popular. I noticed that, like, that there's an upmarket paint brand called Farrow and Ball.
Yes.
They actually have a color called arsenic, which is a little dodgy. I think to actually call it that, but yes, they have a color.
Oh, bloody Farrow and Ball. Farrow and Ball. I mean, the absolute ball ache that company is giving me.
I imagine Mrs. AA having 100 taster pots with various swatches around the house.
You have no idea. You have no idea. And then she's like, "Oh, you have to put these down in the garage." And I'm like, "Where am I going to put these?" "Oh, put them on that shelf in front of your many thousand pound Shakespeare book collection." Anyway,
can you even see? Can you even see these colors?
Oh yeah, I can see these colors, but I mean the bloody elephant's breath and a fucking dog vomit, and brilliant, Which one do you like? Oh yeah, sand monkey.
We should do a competition to come up with your Farrell and Ball name for a color.
I know that's ridiculous. I had a room that had a Farrell and Ball color called, I think, Polo, which was a sort of a vermilion kind of. No, it was a vermilion red.
And after all that, now she's like, oh, I'm not sure about this yellow in this room. I think I want to change it. I was like, right, you either paint it yourself, you hire someone to do it. I want nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it at all. Bloody hell. Anyway, carry on. In fact, reading about the Carlyles, I was actually reminded of my own marriages. Well,
what is that line that my Panama Hat likes to quote? Is that it's very fortunate that Mr. and Mrs. Carlyle met each other and married, so that they only made two people miserable rather than four. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Carry on. Carry on.
Right. Let's keep it. Let's quick. We're halfway through, but I will exponentially speed up. So basically, that is the kind of the precursor. There's a few other things that went on towards the latter part of the 19th century, and I think it's really the birth of interior design. And I want to go back to something that Dee said earlier about this being a fundamentally bourgeois activity, and I think that is 100% true. The whole arts and crafts movement would not have existed if it wasn't for middle class and upper middle class having a bit of additional income and looking to try and be individual and to kind of try and show off their taste. And if we just scroll down, there's a couple of things that were fundamental to that. First is, I would say that the Liberties of London, the department store. Now, if those of you who have frequented London may have visited it, that's the store that stands today is actually new. It was done in I think it's like 25. I'm pretty sure this is a picture of the old store, but it's virtually impossible to find what it looked like in the Victorian period. But the Victorian period is marked by the launch of the department store and Liberties, which specialised in oriental goods.
What is that?
The old Liberty store.
No. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm gonna zoom in. There's something here that I find. What is that?
That's a woman.
What's happened to her?
I think it's in the 20s, so she's probably emaciated through the Great Depression, no doubt.
Look, that's horrific. She's. Oh my god, she's like an actual
waif.
walking zombie. What? She's a white.
She's,
Look at that.
No, she's a one. Yeah, from Fallout. What do they call the? What do
Holy
they call
shit.
the? Yeah.
She hasn't got a nose, sir.
I think that's the top of her hat. I don't think that's her face. I think that's.
Where?
I think her head is downcast and she's wearing a hat.
It's too much. Yeah, too much.
I can't see it.
Too much booze and cocaine, and
She's a legendary
I mean,
feral ghoul.
everybody else looks amazing, but what
Oh, all right.
is that?
but
That's
going
horrific.
back to the
All right,
department store.
Okay.
Sorry
Carry on.
to interrupt your
All
white
right.
spotting. The fundamental piece about this is that there are these new taste centers, so it's not necessarily like elites or tastemakers doing it. You know, it's the department stores are choosing which items go into it, and so whatever goes in Liberties becomes very, very popular. You know, and we have that today where Selfridges is still, you know, pretty well respected. There's one other thing that massively affected people. If we can scroll down, if AA is still there.
I think he roboted and he may be gone.
He probably the spirit of that woman came to him. But the white came out of the screen in a Ringu style.
Can we get Bon Marché in here?
I have not put Bon Marché in there, no.
Primark.
But the other thing that that we'll go to in a second is the kind of massive explosion of magazines and books about how to run your home.
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, yes.
I'm
Yeah, can
now
do.
on the park Wi-Fi again.
Oh, great. The Park Fi. Yeah, so if you scroll down to
Horrific.
the interior
Carry
manuals, and so you have basically had these books kind of explaining what taste is. And again, like Dee said, in the past with the aristocratic taste, you would just literally go around your friend's house who also lives in a manor and ask who created that for you, or you'd see general styles, wouldn't you? There wouldn't be like a magazine telling you what taste looks like. Mr. D?
Yes, indeed. There would be. I mean, there was an early. I mean, like Thomas Chippendale published a famous volume of sort of design, and there was
director.
The Cabinet Maker's Director, and there were others of that period. But yes, I mean, certainly the 19th century. Also, strangely enough, it coincided with the rise of like cookery books, like Mrs. Beeton, famous in this period. This idea that you would need to, sort of learn from a manual. You would sort of get your taste from from these manuals, from these experts. And also, yes, periodicals of the time would have been quite influential. I was looking through the other day a copy of the Strand magazine from I think it was slightly later than this. It was maybe 1900. But they are absolutely loaded with adverts showing. I didn't know they'd come that early, but adverts showing the kind of lovely home and things that you could do with your home. So yes, all of this really rose up quite quickly.
Yeah. So I think all of this is fundamentally bourgeois, basically. But if we kind of scroll through, what was chosen by these people were this new kind of arts and crafts movement, Morris Furnishings, etc. And there was another couple of movements. We won't have a huge amount of time to go through it, but the first attempt at I guess like an artists collective is a group called the Century Guild. It's basically 3 or 4 artists who all focused on the home, produced a book called The Hobby Horse, which kind of summed up some of the kind of arts and crafts ideals. Let's just skip through to the next section because that's more pertinent. The other major group was the Art Workers Guild. Hey, can you move down a bit. Sorry. Keep going to the next one. And this is really the kind of where the term arts and crafts really appeared from. And they're famous for creating the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society, which created a series of I guess, exhibitions taking some of the best artists and handicraftsmen. So artists on the left, you can see shaking the hands of the craftsman on the right. And it started in 1890, and this is really what we formerly known as the kind of the true birth of the arts and crafts movement. Now, I've got some very, I don't know how much time we'll have to go through everything, but if you kind of scroll down, in conjunction with this, they had their own book called The Studio. And this is, I actually have a copy from the kind of the fourth exhibition where they kind of talk through it in a little bit more detail. But can we just zoom in on the text on the right-hand side? Hopefully we'll have enough time just to quickly go through some of this. If you, I don't know how much you can zoom in. Okay, maybe I have to oh, there we go, yeah. So look, let me just read a little section from this because it kind of explains some of the ideas, and you can see how, again, Carlyle and Ruskin comes through this. Therein we find a protest against the modern industrial system, which has thrust the personal element further and further into the background, until the production of ornament, instead of growing out of organic necessities, has become a marketable affair, controlled by the salesman and the advertiser, and at the mercy of every passing fashion. And I quite like that little phrase at the start. And again, this is the world we live in today, where again, it's not by the craftsmen or the tastemakers. It's the middle has taken control over what is fashionable. You know, it's an advertising executive putting a dress on Kim Kardashian, and then everyone starts to wear that. That is the age we live in. We're an age of just purely financially focused tastemakers as well. Anyway, if you can zoom out again and then maybe skip on. I've got some pictures from the kind of first arts and crafts exhibition. Oh yeah, this is the list of the people in the society actually, and it's really like, if you know anything about the 19th century, it's like a dream team. You know, you've got C.R. Ashby, you've got Ford Madox Brown, Burne Jones, the De Morgans are in there as well. You can look through in your own period, but it's really like an A-list event with hundreds of handicraftsmen involved and exhibiting. Now, if you scroll down a little bit, keep going. This is just, I had to put I literally soy faced over some of the people involved. It was that good quality. And I've got some pictures of some of the works that were in this exhibition as well in the 1890s. The first, this is the actual space itself. So it almost looks like an art gallery, but it's kind of, you know, showcasing some of the best work out there, some of the trends, etc. But everything's made by hand in these spaces as well. Now I've got some kind of individual bits to kind of show the breadth of work. On the left is a kind of a cabinet made by CFA Boise, who would then go on to be, I would say, one of Britain's most important Edwardian artists. You've got on the right hand side a book cover this was for Christiana Rossetti's Goblin Market. You know, she's Rossetti's sister and famous poet in her own right. Do you rate Rossetti as a poet at all, or you a fan AAND?
Well, it's been many years since I studied any Rossetti, so I would have to take another look. But I remember enjoying it when I did it.
Yeah, I'm not terribly familiar with Rossetti's poetry, so.
Yeah, I mean, Goblin Market's a famous work, and she does a couple of other bits, but it's reasonably popular. But again, hopefully this kind of shows the kind of the depth of work that was out there. If you keep on going, you've also got more formal artwork. So Ford Madox Brown, who's kind of long in the tooth by now, creating some stuff. On the right, you've got Frampton, who's coming through as the next generation of the new sculpture movement. So this kind of goes into the Edwardian schools as well. So this is a really important moment for kind of showcasing this is the old on the left and then the new on the right hand side. If you scroll down as well, it's not just old forms. And I thought what was interesting was how they had a few pieces on electric lights. So again, most people's houses were not electrified at the time, but they still wanted to kind of create beautiful things for those new items. And again, aspects of modern design, focuses often pedantically on, what's your electric light switch that you use and the light fittings, etc. And it all comes out, I think, of the arts and crafts movement. You can see on the right hand side here's some of the suites that Liberty and Co would offer. So there's this kind of collaboration between artists and businesses at the same time, but it's all kind of handmade for upper middle class bourgeois audience as well. Let's keep on going. I've got some spotlights on some various artists. Maybe if we skip through to some of the kind of most well known, maybe De Morgan, because he's I think quite brilliant. So he was a famous ceramics manufacturer. On the left hand side is one of his dishes. These are all hand painted using a metallic luster glaze, which actually originated in Iran. Actually, so this is what one Persian simps should appreciate it.
There's lusterware dishes that became popular in the Middle Ages in Europe as well. They made a lot of them in Spain, and
they love a bird in Iran. Love a bird.
But again, this is where some of the Orientalism came into it as well. So you've got kind of like they call it Moorish artistry coming in a little bit. But there's also the medieval. So on the right hand side, I love this. This is a kingfisher slicing through a fish. I just love the kingfisher's face there in his eyes, and then the fish is just so happy. Yeah. So just these very beautiful objects, and these would sit around your Victorian fireplace. And again, today, if you're lucky enough, you may have tiles by De Morgan in your fireplace in the old period property. If we scroll down, you've got traditional artists like Burne-Jones creating some quite wacky things. I mean, Burne-Jones is famous for his tapestries on the left, but I quite like this hand-painted piano on the right. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it's in taste personally, but I like the idea of your piano being hand-painted by an artist. See, Warhol was way behind the scene when he hand-painted that car, you see. So,
yeah. I think it's a harp.
That's a harpsichord, is it? Okay, yeah.
It may be a pianoforte. I can't tell.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair to poor old Burne-Jones, I have seen some Baroque instruments that have nothing. This has nothing on those in terms of going a little overboard.
Yeah. Walter, if we stop on Walter Crane, so he's one of the kind of key organizers of the arts and crafts movement, and actually he's one of my favorite artists. On the right hand side is Corona Vitae, which I think is actually my favorite wallpaper ever created, which has lots of depth to it. He also did lusterware for Pilkington and Co, and this is becoming quite popular again. This kind of shiny metallic glazed ceramics on the left hand side.
Is that wallpaper have metallic gold in it?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, there's this interesting thing where technology was kind of playing a part. Crane created some kind of hospital wallpapers for like the new children's hospitals that had like a plastic coating on for the first time, and this had like a gold tipped in layer to it at the back, so it's quite beautiful, but it's very rare. Very rare stuff.
Can you imagine having that on the wall? That would be a bit loud, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and also this isn't even the half of it. This is only like part of it, and it had a top trim which went around the room. It's very, very bold, but I mean it's quite a muted color palette. So again, when you step back, you lose all the detail. It sort of merges together, so you just see some of the bigger patterns. So it does work in the right setting. So the thing about wallpaper is you need to have the right room size. So again, you have to have the high ceilings, you have to be quite far apart, and you have to have the right objects in it for it to really work, I think. But
I mean, the thing about a lot of this is you can't mix. It's very difficult to mix these things. You sort of have to have everything being a kind of in aesthetic accord. I have very much a kind of eclectic mix and match, but it's very hard to do that with some of these Victorian objects. They really need to be kind of set pieces on their own to be properly functional.
Postmodern D. What was that T.S. Eliot said about the rags of the images?
The heap of broken images, yeah.
The heap of broken images. Things fall apart, center cannot hold. Let's carry on. Can I just say, by the way, this will sound like a very strange comment, but some of these earlier ones that we looked at, this one especially, kind of reminds me of like Soviet social realism. Now that sounds like a very odd connection, but I can see this seems like a prototype for what became Soviet art.
Scroll up to that. Sorry, if you scroll up to the entry ticket with the artist and the workman holding, like, shaking hands. So it was created. Sorry, one up. Here we go. Yeah, this is basically Walter Crane, one of the organisers, and again he was a socialist, just like Morris. And I'm 100% sure this is the kind of beginning of, depicting the worker as a noble man. I mean, there's definitely veins of like French realism as well. You could say pulls into that as well. But these kind of more bombastic, here's like the allegory of science working with the allegory of art, definitely comes from this period as well. So yeah, that was a great shout.
All right, let's carry on.
Strangely enough, the suprematist artist Kazimir Malevich, who is famous for painting like white square and
squares,
black square. Late in his career, he basically shifted and started doing these like quasi-Italian, late medieval portraits, very much in this kind of the sort of stylistic tropes that are being shown here. And I think partially to kind of please the new aesthetic that was developing in the Soviet Union at the time. So I think there is something to that of the sort of adopting this kind of this medieval workman's this sort of
aesthetic,
blending of these aesthetics.
If we just scroll up to Gimpson just 1 second, I put this one in specifically for you because I thought the piece on the right looked a bit mid-century. So again, I like
it did. I was thinking that looks quite modern actually.
Yeah, Gimpson's known for his kind of more minimalist furniture, and again, like this is really the beginning of like modern design. And again, you can trace a direct thread from these guys to the mid-century modern guys basically as well. But I thought Gimpson's very interesting because he does like predate that style quite a lot. Dresser as well, who I haven't included as part of this. But let's keep on going. We'll skip some of the minor guys.
I mean, I think it's worth saying as well that we're talking about socialism. I think it's worth remembering that if you went up to a socialist at this time, or in fact any time up until really very recently, and said, "Oh, by the way, I support like, wouldn't it be really great if we had transgender rights and gays and so on?" They'd probably punch you.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no this idea that like a socially liberal attitude and socialism have to go together is not quite right. In fact, it was much more likely to be social conservatism wedded to socialism. Up until the New Left. Would you say?
Yeah.
Or
no, definitely, 60s basically.
Yeah, the return of the Bolsheviks, I would say.
Yeah. What I want to do with this is just to kind of show you how we had this initial kind of core. There's about 6 exhibitions and then they disbanded, but it was kind of like a shockwave through the country. And what you had was a number of local arts and crafts movements. So it wasn't just London orientated. There's lots of these local ones. This is the Birmingham Guild, which was the kind of second largest. But there was really like I think there was like 50 or 60 smaller groups up and down England, focusing on handicrafts and creating handmade objects. So you can see on the right hand side, that's another electric lamp that's been hand paneled, where it's called, you hit it with a hammer basically to create those kind of dimple effects and to shape it basically.
Hand hammered, yeah.
Hammered, yes, yeah. But let's keep on.
Imagine beautiful things coming out of Birmingham.
I know. I was by there the other day. It was a very, very sad place to go by. Anyway. But also there was this huge resurgence in bookmaking, bookbinding. I don't want to talk about it too much if we ever get the bookbinding stream. But on the left, this is the Quest, which was the kind of Birmingham Handcrafts magazine. And again, you can see it's done in a woodcut style. So again, hand wood carved. I thought this is almost kind of like German expressionist style again, but like 30 years beforehand.
Yeah.
Is it just me, or is some of this looking quite D&D? It seems like
it's more like the D&D was inspired by this, because in the 70s there's a big in the 1970s there's a big arts and crafts revival, and again lots of the kind of themes of medievalism were seen through the Victorian lens. So again, I always think about someone like prog bands, etc. They were looking to the Victorians' notions of Arthur as opposed to medieval notions, and the same with the D&D. They're riffing from Tennyson and Morris, not the actual sources.
Would it be fair to say Tolkien is a missing link between these two, like this era and what you're talking about? There's in the middle of that. There's Tolkien. It was a kind of.
Yes, and his sort of drawings for his own works, I think are strongly kind of influenced by some of this. Strangely enough, of course, in the late 60s and 70s, I think another thing that happened is that a lot of the people who, a lot of the sort of, grandparents who had all this Victorian stuff, these Victorian objects, were dying, and a lot of it was going into the rubbish tip or going into second hand. And a lot of the kind of hippies and young people around the time were buying this. There's this like weird Victorian resurgence in the 70s, partially because I think that there was so much of it that you could get it for very cheap. It was very cheap. Even in my life, I remember some of these things were very cheaply had.
I remember
it inspired people maybe to get into that mindset. But
I remember as a kid, we went to an auction, and my parents picked up a genuine Victorian fireplace, and then had it in. My dad cleaned it up, and I helped him do it, and then we had it installed and so on. That was probably some time in the 80s, but it seems like in my mother's world, Victorian stuff is the height of, like, she still has associations of that being great, and she is horrified by my mid-century stuff. She was like, because that was the stuff they were throwing out,
Yeah. But it's interesting. I was like, what happens next? Because there's literally nothing. The mid-century is like the last design movement, like true design movement, I think. So again, I think that's part of the cultural malaise we're in. There's nothing to hand down. There is no kind of gentrification of the past. It's interesting.
They're gonna love my Memphis Milano furniture.
maybe Memphis comes back. Actually,
I've got a friend who likes to collect old Apple Macs, like like if he's got a room that is almost like a museum to old Macintosh computers and things like that. So I'm wondering if that is the next.
That's a huge market. Again, another thing that I'm absolutely kicking myself. I mean, now you find these old, things like the Sam Coupe and the Auric Atmos. These old computers that you couldn't even give away at a certain point. People are now like voraciously collecting them. So yes,
there is a kind of I mean, this is going to sound so weird that I'm making this connection, but they're like the revivalism of 8-bit pixel art in indie gaming, for example. I mean, most of the games I buy these days have deliberately retrograde art, where it's made to look like either an 8-bit or a 16-bit. So it's kind of like all of the AAA games out there, and a lot of the innovation is happening with this. I mean, it's revivalist. It's in a strange way, because it's deliberately using lesser technology, even though computers now can run, Skyrim. I mean, dating myself there, whatever the latest AAA titles are. So I do wonder if these things happen in every generation in kind of weird and hidden ways. Although when it comes to interior design, you're probably right. I mean, unless there's a Lawrence Llewellyn Bowen revivalist movement at some point.
Oh, Lord.
Well, I think also it's easier to revive like mid-century design. It's easier to revive that 8-bit aesthetic because it's easy to make that. I mean, you try to do the Quest. that takes a lot of skill to do these things. You can't do Pugin and Morris and such easily and cheaply. So these types of things, I don't think they don't really get revived in the same way that kind of easier to imitate styles, cheaper to imitate styles get revived.
All right, so let's carry on.
Okay, I'll be super quick. One of the interesting successor movements from the English arts and crafts was the Wiener Werkstätte, which is the Viennese group is a company that created handcrafts, and it's kind of tied into the Austrian secession movement. So if you obviously the biggest proponent of this will be Klimt. So basically in the late 90s, a group of Austrian artists broke away from the establishment and created their own their own artworks. You're getting ahead. You're ruining my slides.
Sorry. Yeah.
So just a couple of.
I was looking for Klimt.
Characters. Yeah, Klimt's not in there because he's an artist, not a crafter. You see. So
I see.
one of my favorites is Koloman Moser. On the left-hand side is a handcrafted. This is actually like a writing chest. Can you see there's a handle in the center? You can pull that out, and that's actually a chair. And then here on the left, yeah. You see the handle? Pull the handle out. That's a chair, and then the top comes down. You can write on your desk. I also like that Moser created a stamp, and that's the whatever they call him, the king of the king of the Austro-Hungarian Empire there, whatever is it Franz Joseph, is it?
That ancient dude who was the king forever. Yeah,
exactly. But what's interesting is that this idea of design was sort of seeping into all aspects, not just furniture and interiors, but also postage. And again, if you see the modern design movements, they go on off about how it's like everything is designed from the traffic signs you see to a website. And again, we've got the Viennese to thank for that. If we scroll down, the other kind of key player was Hoffman, and again you can start to see that they have much more modernistic designs. Hoffman's it's all about minimalism and shapes and squares. This is done in kind of 1910.
Is that because they're Germans and love efficiency?
Well, I think the Austrians are very ornamental still. I mean, look on the right hand side. This beautiful. This is a samovar, tea brewer or whatever.
And that could almost be a Memphis object.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think Memphis took a lot from the Werkstätte actually. But this is hand beaten silver with ebony handles and ivory and coral. These beautiful, expensive materials, all handmade by these Germans. I had to put in a woman, unfortunately, in the next slide because she's quite famous.
I don't like that. I don't like this teapot. By the way, I'll just admit that I don't like it.
This is kind of like the early modern style. So again, maybe you like some of the.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah, I think it is very beautiful, and it's
the chair as well.
It's the combination of sumptuousness and kind of simplicity, which I think
it's got a silly handle which looks like it's made of cardboard. That's what I say.
This, in my opinion, is peak modernism, but also it's not just about interiors; it's also about clothes. So I've put in Emile, who was kind of like one of the lovers of Klimt. You may recognise her from some of the pictures she was in, and they would often collaborate on dresses. I think the one on the left is something that Klimt worked on with her. Now, one thing I did note with the picture on the right-hand side was that how familiar. I'm 100% sure if we scroll down, you may have seen the new Cursed Lord of the Rings images. I swear, whoever was doing the designs took a picture from Flug. You can look at the hair, just match the hair, match the kind of triangular design, match the same outfits. I'm 100% sure it's been taken, but look how far we've fallen.
She wasn't morbidly obese for one thing.
Good spot there. This is literally everything Carlyle talks about in a single image, by the way. just everything about this image is everything he warned us about. But anyway, let's carry on. Have you seen the next Doctor Who is going to be black, of course, gay black man.
No.
Carry on.
Did you see based Darren Grimes talking about that?
No, what did he say?
No. He made some tweet and then deleted it where he's like, oh, Black Doctor Who. Yeah.
And this just quickly, this is I have to go in a second. Unfortunately, this is the last section, which is a modernist take on the arts and crafts movement, the Omega Workshop, created by Roger Fry in the 20s, or I think during the First World War, where again they tried to create these handcrafted items, but again with a very modernist feel. It's like got hand painted stuff on it there, so you can see this is all done by hand. I put in Duncan Grant for Mr. D there, especially. I know he's a big fan of Duncan.
Good old Duncan Grant's, yes.
And Vanessa Bell. So this is all the Bloomsbury set basically, and finally, Wyndham Lewis, interestingly, was involved at the beginning, but then had a massive fallout with Fry, and then went on to create the Rebel, like the Rebel Furniture Club or something like that, which then became the Vorticists. So if it wasn't for the Omega Workshop, it wouldn't be there. I don't know. I have to basically go now, unfortunately. But I've put in just a last section, maybe for you guys to take a look at and reflect on. If you keep on just going to the end.
The Bauhaus. Yeah.
I don't have the Bauhaus, no.
Okay, I mean, because they sort of continued a little bit. I mean, they were doing weaving and except in a very modernist way. Ooh.
Today.
I like. That's monster. What is that? That's monster.
Oh dear! Oh dear! Oh dear!
Yeah, and with this, unfortunately, I must bow out. This is actually done by Prince Charles. Created that school, but whose tradition? But I'm really sorry. I got to jump off now. But
cheers, Pharaoh. Make sure everybody buys
wonderful stuff.
Foundations of Entrepreneurship, Pharaoh's brand new course, going now for only 900. What was it? £99. 99 pence. All right. Shall we do some super chats and get out of here? AA's Alpha Simp says, "Great stream. Love reading cases where punitive damages are awarded." So there we go. I think
one farthing.
The Whistler case.
One farthing.
And Mary Barone says, "Greetings from East Aurora, New York, home of the Roycroft campus, an arts and crafts community founded by Elbert Hubbard in 1985 and still going today." So there we go.
Yes, the Roycrofters. I've definitely heard about. I think I have a book that's and I think that's 1895. I don't think it's 1985. I believe it was. I believe Elbert Hubbard was the same period as a lot of this work.
Not to be confused with L. Ron Hubbard, of course.
No, not to be confused with L. Ron Hubbard. No, who founded a community of a sort. But yeah, I have some. I definitely have a couple of Roycroft printed books. So very interesting to know that.
I have to admit that there are elements of this style that make me think of the dreaded L word, LARP. I can just recognize Victorian LARP in a lot of this material. Obviously Pharaoh's gone now, so he's not here to defend it, but that makes me I've got this idea, I've got this idea where I feel like the art coming out of a period should in some way, the art coming out of any period will always tell us about that period. I've been accused of radical historicism by Apostolic Majesty, but I just don't see, I've been reading a Vico recently, Giambattista Vico, who also had a very hard historicist line on things. And I just don't think that you can escape, you just cannot escape the social milieu that you find yourself in. And so if any of us were try to create medieval art, for example, we're kind of like escaping or pretending that we're not living in this this period right now.
Exactly. This is an eternal problem. I mean, this is a complaint I often have. about the kind of so-called trad aesthetic, because it is just a 20th generation, a faded photocopy of something that people were doing 100 years ago, who were copying something that people did 500 years ago. I mean, it's just this watered down fantasy that has really nothing to do with the tenor of our time. I mean, I think, and that's a problem with a lot of this Victorian work. I think that's why it is extraordinarily beautiful and meaningful as some of it was. I mean, it was also so laden. It was just one revival after another. The 19th century is just beginning with Egyptian revival and ending with the most obscure thing that they could find to revive by the end. And there's all this is a problem. But of course, as I said earlier in the stream, there are those who say that British native architecture and British native arts were polluted by the neoclassical movement, so that basically Palladianism sort of back in the 17th century displaced all of these wonderful native styles and ruined a nascent real native work of art. And of course it's the trad people who would say, well, this Georgian building is the kind of epitome of traditionalism. Well, it's not really, that's a revival, just as all of these things were revival. And at a certain point, you're like you said, it's a LARP, or it's just escaping into a fantasy of the past.
Yeah, and I was obviously I've been reading Carlyle of late to try to get this article in. And if there's one thing that you can't accuse him of doing, it's that he does, when he puts his hand to creation, right, he ends up really innovating and creating something like unique and new. I mean, we mentioned Sartre, Rosatis, but also the French Revolution. Like, he was self-consciously trying to write an epic, right? So he's somehow like, it's almost like an epic poem, but at the same time, he's doing something that has never been done before. So it's both new and old, if that makes any sense. So whereas some of these things that we've been looking at, I just wonder if that's really happening, or is it just this kind of, trying to ape something that was something that is dead and gone and lived 1,000 years ago.
And there's also a difference between the continuation of a tradition and the kind of adoption of an aesthetic that is that isn't a part of your tradition at all. I mean, the problem is that so many modern people have no tradition. I mean, that line was broken generations ago, and so of course, as much as you want to put on runes and and run about with your axe, and you're play acting a revisionist history that you have no connection to. So I would say that it's about trying to find a way where you're not just aping a style that you've learned about, but you're actually engaging in some way with what is left of a living tradition. And that's very difficult, very, very difficult. So there's nothing wrong with being, sort of immersing yourself in the past. And I mean, in my own work, which I don't, I'm not going to talk about for various reasons, but I am very strongly influenced by, let's just say, the traditional way of doing things. But I took it in a very different direction, So.
I mean, I'm of the view that we live in such a nihilistic and bankrupt age that even with the best will in the world, I don't believe it's possible for anyone to produce anything that isn't in some way tainted by it, and it will find a way through somehow, somewhere. Now, when we were talking about Warhol, obviously his whole work is about that whole problem, right? But even those people who are trying to rail against it in some way, or trying to produce something that is, genuinely transcendent or whatever, I feel like it will still be touched in some way by the all-encompassing miasma. And I mean, people might want to point to Tolkien, but Tolkien is very much a product of his time and place, and there's
Absolutely.
all sorts of concerns with the World War, and it's all there. It's all right there in Lord of the Rings. So, I just do worry about being ahistorical. In like, can you be ahistorical? I don't think it's even possible. But maybe that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
I
I
guess
think,
it
I
was-
think that these are all very, I think these are all very pertinent questions, and I think one that all these artists were dealing with. I mean, if you look into the writings more, there's sort of hints of, some of these kind of, there's a realization of some of these kind of issues. So,
and yes, it was 1895. So there we go.
Okay, right.
All right. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Pick up Pharaoh's new course, Foundations of Entrepreneurship. Populist Delusion still out. We'll be back tomorrow night with Unpopular Opinions. Do you know who we've got on?
No, I don't.
Well, he's making
fan favorite Shinobi Yaka.
Whenever I get sick of the kids, I bring in Shinobi back from
And then you realize why you had the kids on in the first place.
Oh, poor old Shinobi. All right, everybody, get out, please. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
What goes on in this town is none of your business.
As long as I'm living here, it is.
Then maybe you shouldn't be living